And so we live in a time of some very obvious truths. In Matthew, we heard God, the Creator, sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. Dot and I went for a walk yesterday, and that's true. It's true. Not so obvious for us in our society is how we love our enemies. Because in much of the Christian community over our history, we have tended to slip into a judgment mode. We have had fears of diversity, which challenges our truth. And we have participated and supported institutions that promote cloning as the answer to all our problems. So we have sought to develop monocultures, limited understandings of what it is to be faithful. In our schools, in healthcare, in our prisons, and in so much of what we describe as places of opportunity. But we know we have something together. We know we are invited by gospel into community. I want to share with you a brief story about Remembrance Day and how it has come to have meaning for me. Dot and I have a friend in Curve Lake, Ontario, north of Peterborough, a small Anishinaabe community. And our friend Murray, who is now in his mid-90s, was in the Second War. In Murray's village of Curve Lake, when the call came out for people to serve in the Second War, all 18 young men of his village went into Peterborough and enlisted. All 18 of eligible men in the village. Murray smiles when he says that 17 of them went to Europe on a ship, but one couldn't go because he was allergic to the wool in the uniforms. And so within a day of wearing his outfit, he had to be sent home because he just could not live in the military uniform. So Remembrance Day is made up of many stories that each of you hold and carry. Stories of people wondering about freedom and wondering about safety and security. And I love the English language. And as I come to this territory, I want to acknowledge that I'm in traditional homelands of many First Peoples, and that I have lived my life in the church learning from people in coastal villages. I remember Elder Alberta Billy from Cape Mudge, who was the woman who asked the General Council to apologize in 1985. I remember Dolly Lansdowne from Bella Bella, who dreamt of a community of faith that was liberating for all peoples, who dreamt of radical change. And so I'm indebted to the wisdom of the many, many villages along this coast and the interior of this land. I was invited to speak to you briefly about the TRC. And as I prepared to come to you, I have had a change of mind. I've been troubled by Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I'd like to keep the TRC, but I would change it to Truth and Remembering Commission. truth and remembering. Because I have learned from elders that a part of our problem is we tend to forget our family responsibilities, our relationships with each other, the importance of humility and love, the importance of learning to trust each other. So the Truth and Remembering Committee, you see, English has put re in front of membering. Gachinau in Wako Maganak is what we say in the lodge of our people. Gachinau in Wako Maganak says, all my relations. If you don't know, this is now on the United Church crest. We were very subversive and suggested that on the edge of our famed outline of the fish, symbol of Christianity, that we include the phrase, all my relations. It's written there in the language of the Mohawk peoples. The intention is that we remind each other that we are all related, we're all relatives, but we're also related to creation. And I marvel at what this congregation, this community has done in setting forward your statement of values and vision. That peace cannot exist without justice, is what you say. I heard that so clearly at UBC in 1983 when the World Council of Churches met in this city. There is no peace without justice. So we are on a journey of understanding what it is, as you have been journeying to discover what it means to be peaceful people. I believe one of the most difficult expressions for us in the United Church of Canada and in much of Canada is to perceive that part of our journey is liberation. Liberation not from our stories, but from the full meaning of the stories that we carry. The inclusion and respect that brings us together. So the Truth and Reconciliation has a number of recommendations. One that I would lift for you is recommendation number 59, which calls on congregations of the churches, communities of faith, to learn of the role that you played, that we played in colonization. The history of residential schools, the suppression of language and culture. The TRC is asking that we remember that part of our history. Yesterday we had a blanket exercise in the Peace Building, and it attempted to create a sense of empathy with what has happened between Canada and First Peoples. I invite you to learn about the blanket exercise. Recommendation number 60 says, collaborate with Indigenous spiritual leaders and teach clergy respect in the theological schools. So you have a theological candidate in your midst, I gather. She's going to be given some learnings, I think. She already carries many. I met her yesterday, and she is already engaged and prepared to fulfill this piece of the TRC. So it's not as though we're beginning from point zero. We have in our midst possibilities to move on the recommendations. The other recommendation, number 61, suggests that there be an ongoing healing process, but one that is controlled by Indigenous peoples. A healing process which is about our contribution to understanding justice and peace and liberation for all peoples into the future that is before us. It's very difficult in the United Church of Canada, I have found, to speak of healing as something that is required not only for the Indigenous, but for all of us, that all of us are about the business of healing, and there is healing for the land. So the Healing Fund of the United Church of Canada, up until this day, has primarily been perceived by members of the church as being for the healing of those of us who experience residential schools and living on marginal lands in marginal corners of this land, that we require healing. But my perception is this is about all of us, and it requires significant humility and a whole new approach to life that will engage us in the work of the Creator, in giving content to our vision and our values. I will tell you now why I have a problem with reconciliation. Again, an English word that has re in front of conciliation. Do you know what conciliation is in the Oxford Dictionary? Conciliation is to make calm and amenable. Conciliation, it says, is to pacify. Conciliation is to gain the goodwill of. All of these descriptions, in my mind, don't address the colonial history because they still suggest the possibility of manipulation and exploitation. The gospel calls us to a new place. Arthur Solomon, an Anishinaabe elder and teacher who lived near Sudbury and with whom I spent many hours, had a saying, Anishinaabe prophecy. Arthur would say, when the four winds blow, the people will be healed and the earth will be healed. The four directions teaching is inclusive of all peoples. The colors on the United Church of Canada's crest are of the four directions. The prayers in the lodge of my people say, Kachinau in Wakumaganak, and we offer prayers in the four directions to acknowledge we are related. The HarperCollins Dictionary suggests reconciliation is a changed relationship for the better between persons or groups who formerly were at enmity with each other. And so I suggest to you today that reconciliation and remembering is a work of the Creator, is the intention of the one who gives us life, the leadership of the Spirit into community. Now, we face a significant challenge within the Christian community because of our history, which goes back to the earliest church. St. Paul's letter to Rome is conflicted. It's very conflicted. If you read carefully that first chapter, Paul begins, as he does in many of his letters, I thank you for your faithfulness. I pray that I may come to you and share spiritual gifts with you. And then he has a second thought. Just a minute. Wait a moment. What I meant to say was, this will be mutual encouragement for each other's faith. I would like you to ponder the difference between I bring to you and I share with you the journey of which we are both mutually engaged, with which we will come together. In this reading also, he mentions brothers and sisters in that order. Paul has some problems with inclusion in that area, as does the church. And then he says, I come to reap harvest among you. This rings for me of a dangerous statement. The concept of harvest is usually a taking away the original rootedness and taking off the fruit, but not acknowledging the original state of that process of relationship. So mission for me also needs to be decommission. I like English. Mission also involves for us in this age, in this time of remembering, demissioning, decommissioning, because the history of mission, in my experience, is not very hopeful. But we can learn about each other, and we can acknowledge in conclusion, as Paul did, he says, I am a debtor to the Greeks and the barbarians. A strange statement, but one into which we fall because of our language structure. I am indebted to the wise and the foolish. Now here's a Cree statement. I am a debtor to the wise and the foolish. You know, in our culture, the strongest teachers we have are those who make mistakes. So while we strive for perfection in community, we learn in our human existence from those who make mistakes. So we love those who are nearly perfect, but we love even more those who make mistakes and rise again to be who they're called to be. So I invite you to follow our process that we did yesterday with the blanket exercise, recognizing that we are in solidarity with many and diverse peoples on this road of peacemaking, this journey of remembering. The Minister of Indigenous Affairs, just installed, Carolyn Bennett, a woman of passion and commitment, suggested this past week that the best advice she'd received about her responsibilities was that she would be the Minister of Reconciliation. She would be the Minister of Reconciliation. Some of you have heard of the new Minister of Justice. My, what a story. I suggested yesterday in our circle that we offer prayers and letters of support to the Minister of Justice. I cannot imagine the number of conflictual and difficult situations she will be drawn in as an Indigenous woman in leadership in a system that is desperately flawed, in which the poor and the marginalized are taken into captivity. So I invite you to offer prayers for her this day, this Remembrance Day, and to support her in days ahead, that she might in fact be the woman she is in bringing humanity into the field of justice and peacemaking. We have many opportunities before us, and we are grateful to the one who calls us into community. I thank you, people of faith, for coming together to remember and to reconcile, to be made new in the shadows of those who have gone before us, who lived and died believing there was a future. I humbly suggest to you that we will be relevant at the time when we can say our vision is for 7 generations into the future. Not for this week or next week, but for a liberation that is unto those who are yet unborn. Thanks be to God who gives us life and purpose. Thanks be to God.